For everyone tuning in, we're now moving into the Q&A phase of the webinar. So make sure you go to the questions area of the chat box and start inputting your questions. Moderating Q&A today is Deb Wachenheim, our Assistant Director of Research Dissemination, OpenNotes. And while you're inputting the questions, I do want to plug our upcoming webinars and office hours. We're going to be focusing on the following months around OpenNotes and pediatrics, mental health, oncology. I'm forgetting the rest, inpatient notes and OpenNotes. A lot of stuff is coming up. So, and Amanda, thanks for sharing that slide. So if you're on our mailing list, you'll learn about those things. So, and then we also are at the end of this week on Friday, we're going to be doing open office hours with Dr. DesRoches and Dr. Jackson, where it's just webcams and asking as many questions that you want. And I know in the chat box, Deb will be sharing the link there. So Deb, what questions are we getting?
Okay, so there was a question about, did you experiment with note sharing in languages other than English? So if either or both of you could touch a bit on what you saw for patients whose first language is not English.
So in the formal pilot study and the follow-up evaluations, we have not experimented with notes written in other languages, primarily because the medical record is written in English. And my greatest fervent hope is that as the app market starts to expand, as people start to get the ability to access their notes through third-party apps on their smartphones, that there will be translation, that AI and natural language processing will help with translation, and that can be built into apps. We know now that right now that the sort of standard Google Translate type of algorithms are not good enough for notes, that they introduce serious errors. But my wish is that could happen, that will happen, and we could think about things like, well, how about if we just start with technology that translates the care plan as the first place to start, because that's going to be maybe written in less technical language than things like than other parts of the note. But there are plenty of places now that are doing this among populations that have limited English proficiency. In particular, Mount Sinai has done it with their Spanish-speaking patients through using Spanish Navigator to help patients sort of learn how to work through the notes. But there hasn't been a lot of other work in that area.
And I would just add, yeah, we haven't done it with actual language translation, but we have a lot of patients who speak other languages, and often we try to leverage their family members, grandchildren, caregivers who do speak English and can use the proxy portal to help with that. But that would be a great future event.
Another question was, has this been studied only with physicians or NPs and PAs as well?
That's a great question. The initial pilot was done only with primary care physicians, but over the intervening years in the 3 sites, as they opened notes across all of their ambulatory care settings, now it's now NP notes, PAs, nursing notes, all kinds of notes can be read by patients. So our more recent clinician survey that I showed you, that includes PAs and NPs.
I'd like to share that.
And they tend to be about the same as docs. Their attitudes tend to be about the same. I would say maybe NPs are a little more positive, but on the whole, everyone is fairly positive. So there's small differences.
And if you're looking for any of the research that Cait is referencing, we just released a new tool on the OpenNotes website. It's a research search tool. I'll post the link to that in the chat box, but it's essentially opennotes.org/research, and then you can kind of filter by what kind of research you're looking for.
Another question was, is the patient portal the only way that patients are allowed to receive their notes? Can you further define the electronic availability with OpenNotes? Does that mean I can send them securely in email?
So the regulation doesn't state that patients have to, it doesn't state that patients have to log on and get their notes by clicking on a notes tab in the portal. You can send the notes electronically through the view, transmit, and download function, or you can allow patients to see them through the notes and visit tab. And I suppose you could also send them as secure messages. I mean, that's HIPAA compliant because it's behind your firewall. And if that's what a patient requests, I don't see why you couldn't do it that way.
Can you speak about how behavioral health note sharing has been received by patients and physicians, especially any rupture in trust between clinicians and patients, and any special considerations as an agency moves towards sharing these behavioral health notes?
Sara, do you want to talk about that, or do you want? I can tell you what we know about what we know from research, from our research, but you may have clinical experience with this.
I can give anecdotal information. Because I certainly take care of folks who have used the portal and have had significant mental health issues. I would say over the last 10 years, I've had 2 patients who have become concerned. I think, in part because of their mental health condition, particularly concerned about what was written in their notes. And I think my take on that really is there are other things that they were concerned about also. Often if they, if there's something in the note, there's something else that would have happened that they would have had issues with. There was, and Cait, you may be getting ready to talk about this too, after the 7-year follow-up, there's a paper by Klein et al. Where they looked at patients that had mental health diagnoses, about 400 patients, including bipolar and psychotic disorder diagnoses, and compared them to the other respondents. And actually, there was not that much difference in their perceived risks and benefits. This is patient reported. They actually statistically significantly felt that they were better at taking their meds and remembering plan of care than patients without mental health disorders, and were slightly more likely to worry more about their notes. I don't know if that, yeah.
And there's also, we did a pilot at the Beth Israel where social workers shared their therapy notes with patients, and it was overall positive. It overall showed positive results. The patients liked having access to the notes. The social workers, despite initial concerns, felt like it was an overall positive, and they reported that it changed the way they thought about their notes, in that the notes became another tool in their sort of therapy toolbox with patients. And then finally, I'll just talk for a minute about the VA. So at the VA, all notes are shared, inpatient, outpatient, psychiatric, all notes. So you could have a patient who is inpatient for a psychiatric reason, and that patient is reading their inpatient notes during their stay. And so they've done quite a bit of work on this. And one area where they found that it could be challenging for patients to read their therapy notes is around post-traumatic stress disorder. So rereading, if there were sort of all the details of the trauma was in the note, that could be triggering for the patients. That was the one area. And they've actually, the VA's done they have a whole educational module where to help providers kind of get ready for this change and maybe make a few changes to their notes in order to cut down on the number of problems they might have run into. But overall, the VA's experience was also positive.
I do med oncology and palliative care. I ask patients if they want to know the prognosis. Even if they don't want to know, I include it in my note for the day to share with colleagues. How should one deal with this? One concept I have heard is to tell the patient it will be in the record and suggest they not read the note. And then we did have another question just broadly asking, what's your experience with oncology open notes? So if anybody wants to take both of those.
Well, I'll just make a quick plug around palliative care, and then I'm going to let Liz talk for a minute about the oncology, about what we know from our oncology data. We did do a webinar recently with Christian Sinclair. The whole thing was on palliative care, on doing OpenNotes in palliative care. He did address this issue. I would suggest if this is your area and you want to dig into it, the video of the webinar is available on our YouTube channel. And Liz is nodding, so that means I'm saying this correctly. So I would suggest, I think your thought about you need to document it and you need to be open with the patient that this is going to be in the document and you will have access to it, but you don't have to read it, would be sort of his advice as well. But I really recommend, he did a terrific job, so I really recommend that video.
Yeah, so Dr. Christian Sinclair, palliative care doctor at University of Kansas Cancer Center, he presented in October. We've got it online. He was kind of like there is no research on OpenNotes in palliative care. So he's kind of this first person to really be doing this and reflecting on it. And his advice, like Cait said, was, in palliative care is about communication, about serious stuff, sometimes tough stuff. So to talk to patients, like, I'm going to be talking about this in your note. If you want to know about it, you're welcome to read it. If you don't want to know what I'm saying in your note, you don't have to. So it was really nuanced communication stuff that lends itself well to OpenNotes. And when I'm done talking, I'll post a link to where you can find that recording in the chat box so that you can easily get to it. As far as OpenNotes in oncology, we just published something in Cancer Cell, and I could post a link to that in the chat box as well. And it was looking at the OpenNotes after 7 years survey data that we did just a couple of years ago. In oncology specifically, 3 sites have been sharing oncology notes with their patients. And what was interesting was we were comparing clinician views of OpenNotes in oncology and then patients with cancer diagnoses in oncology. And clinicians were like, hey, it's okay, OpenNotes is all right, sharing in cancer care. But patients really love seeing their notes in cancer care. If you think about it, folks who are dealing with something serious, they're invested in their health. They want to know what's going on. And they're actually more likely to read more notes than other patients, maybe because they have more notes and more visits throughout the year, but they also feel like reading those notes helps remind them of what happened in that conversation. Sometimes you're talking about serious stuff, so reminds them of what was discussed, and also helps prepare them for the next visit. So they might be reading their note to go, what did we talk about last time? Oh yeah, this is what we said. So, there's clearly a need for more research into OpenNotes in oncology. And in this series of webinars we have coming up in the next few months, we're going to have one specifically on OpenNotes on oncology, featuring folks from Memorial Sloan Kettering and City of Hope Cancer Center, as well as a patient advocate. So that will be a fun one. So keep track with us and we'll let you know when that's happening.
Has there been an instance of a malpractice case initiated as a result of patients having access to medical record information?
So we were just looking 2 weeks ago at, so our insurer, Crico, has been tracking this issue. And so we were just looking at their data, and for the Harvard hospitals, which is Crico's the insurer of all the Harvard hospitals, over the 10 years since we began OpenNotes, there have been 0 cases that are related to a patient having access to something in their note. And that, I think, is not surprising when we think about the data or the studies around apology and open disclosure of errors. So we know from that work that malpractice, having a malpractice claim filed, is often the result of a breakdown in communication. And the family or the patient feels like they cannot get information about what happened to them or what happened to their loved one. So greater communication, more open communication, is actually preventive against malpractice claims. And because OpenNotes is really all about better communication, all of the data is right there for the patient to see. While Crico still won't yet let us say it prevents or it's a preventive against having a malpractice claim filed, they do let us say that it does not increase the likelihood that that will happen.
What are our obligations to edit when a patient requests?
So your organization should have a process in place already for what happens when patients identify or request an amendment to the record. And I would just suggest you go back to your, whatever your organizational, whatever the protocol is in your organization. So at the BI, a patient might write and say, hey, this is wrong. They can either, the clinician can work with them around an amendment, or they can work through patient care services, but there is a process. And I would just suggest that you review your organization's process. And Liz is giving me the heads up. So
yeah, we're at the last 30 seconds. I should have been paying attention, but I was putting links in the chat box for folks. So I want to respect everyone's time. We all want to respect everyone's time. First, I want to thank Dr. Jackson, Dr. DesRoches for being the experts on today's call. Hopefully you all will and thank you for paying attention today and joining us. I mean, stuff is busy out there. You're all dealing with COVID and caring for people, so thank you. You will receive an email with a link to this recording, a link to the slides. And I hope some of you can join us for our office hours on Friday, where we're going to dig even more into more questions, more nuance, and more open dialogue about what you may know, or we can all learn from each other. Let's see here. Any unanswered questions that Deb is tracking from today's conversation, we will also bring up again in office hours. And I think I've answered all the questions you might need to know as you log out today. Please visit opennotes.org. We've got a ton of resources and toolkits specifically around OpenNotes in communication with patients, OpenNotes in pediatrics and adolescents, OpenNotes in mental health, and on and on and on. Dr. Jackson, did you want to say anything before we end today's webinar, or Dr. DesRoches? Putting you on the spot.
Just thank you for taking the time out of your, I'm sure, what is a very busy day to come learn more about this.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I would just echo that. I know with COVID going on, there's a lot of stuff on people's plates. So thanks for your participation.
Absolutely. Thank you again, Dr. Jackson. It was great to hear from you.